Chapter 1291. The Endless March. A truly transparent effort. Zaluth could have almost praised the Chrysalis for how blatant she was, but it was difficult when the treachery was aimed at him. He controlled the frothing rage that sizzled through his veins along with the acid. Before his departure, he'd exchanged a look with Ghazi. So far, things were moving along the path the old Krath had envisioned. The Chrysalis was vulnerable, her initial plan a total failure. Now she was desperate, lashing out and ordering a full assault. If that too were to fail, then she would be toppled from her position and consumed. All he had to do was make sure he was there when it happened, so he could get himself a taste. Until then, he had to at least appear as if he was doing as he was commanded, otherwise his tribe would eat him for being so obviously disloyal. Which meant he had to go back and monitor the ants. Compressing himself, Zaluth began by moving away from the ants' point of ingress. Once he'd put some distance between them, he doubled back, using every trick he knew to mask his presence and trail. He'd almost been caught by these filthy ants before, and he couldn't allow it to happen again. They'd been bringing in the wibbly abominations when he'd fled, which meant the area of blue mana would have expanded significantly. Calculating this, he re-entered the tunnel occupied by the enemy at what he believed to be a safe distance. It was not a safe distance. When he peeked his eye stalks out into the open space, he was met with a wall of blue mana, oozing toward him and burning away the natural mold, moss and slime as it advanced. It was only meters away and filled with ants, bustling here and there. He snatched his eyes back into his hiding place and swiftly retreated, cursing internally. How had they advanced so far, so quickly? That point had been the very limit of the space they had filled with their corruption the last time they'd visited. Were they planning to expand it even further this time? Moving swiftly, he zipped through the narrow network of minor tunnels and emerged into a blooming patch of sickly, purple moss. Quickly modeling his flesh to match the pattern, he cautiously extended his eye stalks to peer down the tunnel. Yes, he had outpaced the ants, their poisonous mana was several hundred meters away now, but that didn't mean he shouldn't be cautious. Suppressing all signs of his presence, he flattened out his body and approached ever so slowly, using every crevice, patch of slime and mucus to hide his passage. As he drew closer, he became more and more disturbed by what he saw. There were so many ants. The last time they had come, there had been thousands of them. Industrious and swarming, they had filled the corrupted area of the tunnel, always in contact, always connected to each other. But this was absurd. The entire tunnel was ringed with them. On the roof, the walls and floor, many ranks deep. As the blue mana expanded, they advanced, powerful, larger built ants in the front, smaller ones in the back. As they moved forward, they extended their pipe network at the same pace, new pieces laid down as quickly as the blue goop oozed forward. In the distance, Zaluth could still see the tunnel entrance and the steady flow of ants moving through it. He watched as more and more came through, constantly expecting it to stop, or at least dwindle, but it never did. More ants came, more of the blue blobby monstrosities in a never-ending stream until Zaluth felt his eyes were about to pop on the end of his stalks. How many were coming through? Already, they had to have reached more than 10,000, and there were no signs of them slowing down. The mana advanced, and Zaluth was forced to retreat, getting further from the entrance to the fourth as the ants expanded their control of the tunnel. It was all happening so fast, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He could see the ants already at work on another of the nodes he had witnessed before. Already completed plates of enchanted metal were brought forward just as the stone had finished being shaped. In minutes, it was all slotted together, with pipes extended from underneath into the channels that were already prepared. Soon, the pipe network had been connected and pushed out into the unclaimed territory. A few seconds later, a blobby mass of disgusting creatures arrived and was put in place, followed a few seconds later by the flow of 5th stratum mana through the channels. The dreadful monsters chuffed and wibbled as they were fed the mana of the 5th, happily consuming it and emitting the blue abomination around them. It had taken minutes. There was construction taking place further back as well. The ants were shaping, sculpting, reinforcing the stone, bringing down strange metal lattices and enchanted beams of glittering steel. With rising horror and rage, Zaluth began to realize just what he was looking at. This was no test incursion, no practice run. This was the real thing. The ants felt they had learned what they needed to, and now they were moving in. None of this was temporary, they intended to stay. Anger and hate so pure it caused the acid to sizzle and pop in his veins flooded through Zaluth, but he suppressed it just enough to avoid revealing his position. Not that his efforts at stealth seemed to matter. The ants were so preoccupied with their tasks they paid little mind to anything else. Any monster that attempted to challenge the wall of blue mana was set upon by hundreds and hundreds of ants. Without mercy or remorse, the insects piled onto any threat, using their numbers and overwhelming might to eliminate the threat in a matter of seconds. And still more were coming. It never stopped. It wasn't going to stop. Zaluth realized several things at once as he continued to back up the tunnel. First, the Kraflath was going to fail. Even if she marshaled the entire tribe, it wasn't going to be enough to dislodge these ants. Second, this incursion was going to send shockwaves through the entire 5th stratum. There would be a gathering of the tribes soon, and he was going to be there, as the new Kraflath. Chapter 1292. The 5th reveals itself. Things have been going well so far. As expected, the Krath had something waiting for us, but the colony had trusted that I'd be able to deal with whatever they conjured up. I feel like the amount of faith they put in me has only gotten higher after word of the incident at Greystone had gotten around. Our evil, maniacal opponents will have cooked up something truly despicable, but the eldest will take care of us, we can just carry on as normal. I mean, it worked out, sure. I'm just glad the slugs hadn't managed to think up something I couldn't throw an empowered gravity bomb at. Thankfully, most of the problems posed by the dungeon can be solved by a black hole. Whoa there, stop that line of thinking. It's exactly those sorts of thoughts that get me in trouble when I start flinging around super powerful bombs all willy-nilly and nearly get myself compacted. Yes, Anthony, most things can be destroyed by a black hole, including yourself. Hey Tiny, I'm going to the south side now. You and Nvidia need to head to the north. Alright, I get a thumbs up and ghost fist for my trouble. Damn it, Tiny, try and keep your intent under control. Believe it or not, ghost fist. I sigh and turn around. It's not like there's anything he can do about it now. As far as I know, Tiny's been flinging his intent at everyone and everything since the day I met him. I don't even have a full understanding of what intent actually is. If I were to try and phrase it, I'd say it's something like halfway between a thought and an action. Just thinking about chomping isn't enough to fire out intent, you need to visualize it, have the feeling and willingness of chomping, then it'll happen. Tiny is just so obsessed with hitting things that it's basically all he does. Is he actually going to hit that ant? Absolutely not. Does he imagine doing it? How would the punch feel snapping through the air? Does he picture where he would aim, just what would happen as his fist impacted the chitin? Yes he does. And he does the same thing for rocks, water, strong gusts of air and everything else you can think of. If I were to hazard a guess, I'd say that's probably why his punching skills have been rocketing up in levels. Seeing him in a fight is even more bizarre with this new mutation. Tiny is so good at firing off his intent, and can do it so quickly, that he flings out 4 ghost fists for every real punch. What's more, to any monster sensitive enough, they can sense them. I've seen monsters flinching away or dodging punches that aren't actually there, and I would never have believed it if I hadn't seen it myself. Eldest, nice of you to join us at this late hour. I look down at Brendan, who is busy leading the charge here to the south, confused. Realization hits me a moment later when I notice the enchanted timekeeper she has attached to one of her front legs. How late am I? A few seconds. She clicks her mandibles irritably. 6. Oh no, 6 seconds. The entire plan is going to unravel now, damn it. I took a little extra time to berate Tiny and now here I am, getting berated. Brendan is in no mood for my flippant attitude. The plan that Solent has concocted requires precise timing, and we are getting further behind thanks to me having to explain this. She flicks her mandibles at me as if to say, come on, eldest. And I am suitably chastened. I begin to stride forward. All right then, let's get moving. Without hesitation, I plunge through the expanding wall of blue mana and into the poisonous atmosphere of the 5th. This is a dangerous part of the plan. Well, all of the plan is dangerous. We're invading the most inhospitable environment in the dungeon, but this is a tricky bit. We're building and fortifying as we go, but we don't have completely reliable data of what the terrain is like out here. We're already pushing into an area that we haven't reached before. Up ahead lies a large tunnel junction where the mucus river will follow a split down to a lower level, and as we approach, I can hear the screams and roars of many monsters getting a whiff of our invading blue mana. This is what I'm here for, after all. There are many combat-ready and capable ants here, but things will progress faster and safer if I handle as many crazed monsters hurling themselves at our expanding safe zone as possible. As I take up my position, there's already a monster running towards us with murder in its eyes. Well, I wouldn't say eyes. Or, running. I'm looking at it directly, and even I'm surprised. It's an egg. Well, it looks like an egg at least. A giant, sickly yellow egg is rolling towards me, but as it moves, I can see sections of the shell cracking open to reveal a writhing mass of grasping hands within. Why does every monster in this stratum have to be so weird? In the fourth, I might have had to fight dragons, but I'd rather that than bite into this stupid egg thing. With a feeling of resignation, I charge through the muck of the fifth to take on the monster before it gets too close to the advancing line of ants. Rather than latch on with my mandibles, I launch a blast of roaring dragon's breath toward the advancing egg. Sadly, it doesn't seem to have much of an effect. The egg continues to roll toward me, several segments of the shell glowing hot and smoking. In fact, it speeds up, heading straight at me. Guess I don't have a choice. I pull back my mandibles ready to bite, but just as I lunge forward, the egg explodes. Yellow goop and grasping hands fly into the air, and at the same moment, I feel something stir up ahead. There's gravitational waves from many sources approaching. It's an attack. I roar. Chapter 1293, Crath Assault. The yolk of the egg reveals itself to be even more disgusting than what I had supposed. As the ant line behind me prepares for battle, the goop sprayed into the air turns out to be an entire colony of semi-liquid grasping hands. They flutter through the air before raining down onto the ground. I get a particularly bad feeling about these hands, so I flex my legs and use an empowered dash to get the heck out of there. Instead of landing on my carapace, the wriggling hands land on the floor of the tunnel, and that's where the true grossness is revealed. Like writhing noodles topped with a grasping claw, they latch onto the ground and start pulling themselves towards me. What's more, they're fast, way faster than they appear they should be. With a rising sense of ick, I prepare another wave of dragon's breath and unleash it against the oncoming spaghetti swarm. It's much more effective than it was against the egg, and I gleefully cook the pasta with the roaring jet of pure flame. It goes well, at least I think it does, right up until I feel an unbelievable pain latch onto my side. How in the heck? Tilting my head, I can see one of the horrible things has managed to grab hold of me. Instantly, it starts pressing itself against my carapace, burning and melting into the diamond. Ha, you think you can burn through my gravity-compressed diamond that easily? You're dreaming. Except, I realize rather quickly that isn't what the noodle arm of doom wants at all. After flattening itself out, it starts sliding across my carapace toward the nearest joint. The moment it arrives, it starts trying to burrow into the gap and burn its way inside me. Gah, that's disgusting. Dragon's breath. Hot, hot. Note to self, do not set yourself on fire. Thankfully, my gambit appears to have worked. I don't detect any trace of the evil goopy thing that tried to slip its way inside my carapace. Seriously, the monsters in the fifth are just the worst. I'd expound upon their many disgusting attributes, but something else demands my attention. Ahead of me, the many sources of waves I detected have resolved into a massed charge of terrifying-looking monsters. Unlike the earlier assaults we suffered from the random dungeon spawns of the fifth, many of these monsters share a type. These aren't spawns, these are most definitely crafted pets. Casting my senses forward, I seek out any trace of the slimy foe, and to my surprise, I actually find them. The Crath are here, they're actually here. So they weren't content with just skulking around and watching their feeble plans fall to bits. They summoned a little gumption and came out in the open. I really didn't think that was in their playbook. I can barely make them out. The crafty, slithery slugs are doing their best to hang back and stay hidden, but they're definitely there. Well, since they've come out to say hello, I might as well greet them properly. HHHOOOOOOOWWWWWLLLLLLL. The gravity bomb screams into existence once more and rockets forward. All the investments I made in my gravity specialization are really paying off right now. As the raw gravitational energy of the bomb makes itself felt, I benefit in multiple ways, my carapace soaking it in, and my gravity mana gland, now formed of resonant wellstone, turning that energy back into mana, helping recoup the cost of the spell. Without these sweet synergies, I wouldn't be able to fling so many bombs around, but with them, I've got enough in the tank for a few more. The bomb expands, roaring into life and ripping that section of the tunnel to shreds. However, between the wind, toxins and mucus that whip through the air to be consumed, I can see something rather unusual. The manic charge of the beasts has halted in its tracks, the Crath coordinating the charge having retreated and ordered their pets to back up with them. With the black hole screaming its fury into the tunnel, I watch with utter amazement as the Krath turn their monsters around and leave. Oi, get back here. Have the lousy slugs already decided they don't want to have anything to do with me? I almost feel insulted. Get back here and fight, you miserable sacks of slime. But they don't. Now that they realize I'm here, and still packing plenty of heat, they just back off, leaving me feeling a little irritated. I mean, not being attacked is a good thing, right? Except I can guess exactly what the Krath are thinking. They want to avoid running headfirst into the big, bad ant, which means they'll just attack somewhere else, if they aren't already. Lousy sneaks. As much as I'd like to run off to the other side of our expanding mass of blue mana, I can't. Solent has a plan, and that plan requires me to be here, protecting the front as it expands. Besides, if I were to leave, who's to say they just wouldn't come back and attack here? As if on cue, more weird native monsters show up, rushing toward the colony lines with mindless rage in their eyes, spewing poison from every orifice. Which means Tiny is going to have all the fun punching slugs on the other side of the tunnel. Dang it. Chapter 1294. Smash the slugs. The giant, bat-faced gorilla turned away from the small, slightly uneven section of dirt he'd been picturing himself punching and saw the first of the attacking monsters begin to charge. Excitement sparked in his belly, along with actual sparks, but it was a mild sort of interest at first. A few beasts, most of which would be blown apart by the friendly one before they even reached him, weren't something to get too worked up over. But then, something amazing happened. More monsters emerged. Not only did they emerge, they charged. Right before Tiny's widening eyes, a full assault materialized as if from nothing. He was so happy. Energy surged through his bulging limbs as lightning began to crackle all over his body, the pleasant tingling sensation it brought only further lifting his mood. Some of the beasts were massive, little more than huge mouths propelled by fat, crawly legs that belched yellow gas from vents along their bodies. Hitting them was going to be so satisfying. Filled with joy, Tiny pounded his open palms against his chest, beating out a war rhythm as he bellowed his challenge at the horde. All around, the ants readied themselves for battle, the lines of little ones clearing space around Tiny's feet and giving him room to punch in. Boom! An explosion rocked the tunnel, blue flames belching outwards, dust, rock and mucus flying everywhere. Tiny leaned forward, concerned the friendly one had taken out one of the big monsters, but grinned when he realized they were fine. I will leave SSSS the fat one SSSS for you, the friendly one declared, placing a mini hand on Tiny's impossibly broad shoulder. The big ape gave his little friend a thumbs up and extended a finger to rub him on his lid, at the top of his eye. Nvidia had always been helpful, but since evolving, he was so nice. Such a good friend. Turning his attention back to the oncoming horde, Tiny hooted with joy as he judged the time had almost arrived. Drawing back one arm, he compressed the power of his lightning, then sent it blasting forward along with his fist. A bar of lightning arced through the air, sizzling with energy before it fell just short of his target, blasting the rock and sending dust flying. So close. Eagerly, he drew back for another try, but then paused, confusion and sadness welling up from within. The charge had stopped. But they were outside punching range, why would they stop? The huge-mouthed beasts, and other, squishy-looking creatures rose up, and Tiny could sense the power they gathered. As one, the monsters leaned forward and unleashed blasts of thick goop which flew in a graceful arc toward the ant's position. Tiny wrinkled his nose in disgust as the awful stuff flew towards him. He raised both hands and unleashed a blinding flurry of punches. The air warped in front of him for a brief moment, bent out of shape by the speed of his fists. Light exploded outwards as each of his blows launched a fist of light out of the safe zone. His aim was unnerving, each punch connecting with a different blast of goop and annihilating its momentum, sending the stuff sizzling to the tunnel floor. Even then, there were so many globs that dozens still made it through and entered the safe zone. The moment they contacted the blue mana, they popped and sizzled, the dense mana inside fighting to overcome the purified energy provided by the woofers. All of this was greatly upsetting to Tiny. He wanted to punch, but the punching bags didn't want to get close enough. No matter how much he wanted to leap out of the safe zone, he knew he couldn't. He'd been ordered to stay in the blue, which meant he couldn't leave. Stupid orders. Don't even put a finger out there, Chrysalis snapped at him. You know what will happen to you. Tiny rolled his eyes. She was too good at working out what he was thinking. He always wondered how she managed it. Just as he was growing more disgruntled at the situation, a ray of light shone through the darkness in the form of a little ant tapping him on the leg with her antenna. He looked down and felt the touch of the ant's mind against his own. We are going to perform the burst maneuver. You will have 20 seconds to perform an offensive assault. Upon hearing this, Tiny frowned, thinking. The ant looked up at him patiently. Suddenly, the big ape blinked, smacking one fist into his open palm. The burst move. He remembered that one. Satisfied he knew what was happening, the little ant nodded and skittered away as Tiny began to limber up. This was going to be exciting. Clearly, his siblings had also been given the same message, as Chrysalis' pesky warnings rang in his head shortly after the ant had left. Remember, we don't get much time. Very, very little, so don't waste any of it with your silly flexing and posing. Flexing and posing were not silly, they were dignified and somber expressions of power and physique. However, Tiny was forced to agree that a quick attack was not the place for such a thing, so he signaled with a thumbs up. I will give us SSSU lighting later's SSSSS, Nvidia promised, and Tiny gave him a broad grin. Truly, appropriate lighting, the odd fire and a climactic explosion were the perfect backing to complete a flex routine. Filled with good cheer and a building, wrathful energy, Tiny was bouncing on his feet and swinging at the air as the ants prepared their confusing, dizzying formation. With so many circles moving one way or another, Tiny found watching them made him feel a little sick, so he carefully averted his gaze as they began to march. Even if he wasn't watching, he could feel it. The blue mana pulled back slightly, and more was pulled out from behind as the ants manipulated the energy, causing it to pulse back and forth. It was like waves, Tiny thought. They started small, but the ants, who were clever, could turn small waves into big ones, and big ones into a huge one. The enemy continued to launch their acid towards the ant lines, but Tiny and the ants just retreated further down the tunnel, letting the blue mana pack together even tighter. In only a few minutes, it was ready, and Tiny was covered in thick ribbons of lightning, his eyes burning red and fists pounding on the rock by the time the ants finally let it blast forward. In an instant, the blue mana exploded outwards, a dense wave of power that rolled over the poison of the fifth and blew it away. Like a shot, Tiny was off, bounding over the ground as a blur, his sister Chrysalis slipping through the shadows all around him and his brother and good friend Nvidia flapping by his side. In moments, they had reached the enemy lines, who recoiled in fear from the surging blue energy, their lines dissolving into chaos. Tiny pulled back his fists. This was going to be fun. Chapter 1295, Tidal Wave. Zaluth had known the Krath would refuse to attack the giant ant, so he'd repositioned himself on the other side of the tunnel. He'd had to dodge several members of his own tribe on the way. The Krathlath still had sway amongst the members of the Slee tribe, and he couldn't be too careful. Still, it was necessary that he be able to truthfully claim he had done the task assigned to him. So he slithered down the tunnel, using his cunning and guile to evade the ants and his own kind in order to arrive at the other side of the invaders' advance. He had expected the Krathlath to fail in her assault. The blubbeasts and various pets painstakingly raised by the tribe would go to waste, and perhaps some of the Krath would be caught in the mess as well. What he saw exceeded his expectations manyfold. The surge of blue mana had been so potent, so rapid, even he had almost been caught up in it. For a moment, the acid had congealed in his flesh as the blue menace had raced towards him. Only by squeezing himself back into the tunnel and fleeing did he manage to survive. When the corrupted mana retreated, he cautiously emerged once more, extending a tentative eye stalk into the open to see what had transpired. It was a catastrophe. The gathered strength of the Slee had been obliterated in less than a minute. Amongst the carnage, he could see several of his fellow Krath, broken and burned by the toxic power spread by the invaders. Despite the catastrophic loss for his people, Zaluth felt a surge of triumph. The Krathlath, even if she had survived, was finished. He would need to rejoin the others soon to ensure he secured himself a taste of her despair. It would be easy, after that, to position himself as a potential replacement. If Ghazi followed through on his intentions, then he had a good chance to seize that position. The blue mana had retreated after that disastrous surge. In fact, it had retreated further than where it had started. Clearly, that blast of mana had weakened the amassed energy, and now the ants worked to build it back up again. Confident in his analysis, Zaluth crept out into the tunnel, sliding down the wall and onto the floor. It felt so strange. The strands of thick mucus that should have hung from floor to ceiling, gone. The thick layer of slime that should carpet the tunnel floor, gone. Everywhere he looked, fungal blooms and gardens of mold that had been so poisonously vibrant only minutes ago now lay withered and dead, choked to death by the mana of the ants. The fury that thumped eternally within. His slug flesh roared to new heights as he witnessed what the ants had planned for his home. They intended to kill everything, to change it. As he slithered over the lifeless tunnel floor, Zaluth was repulsed by what he saw and felt. This must have happened in the past. There had been many attempts to tame the fifth, but he'd never beheld such an appalling scene with his own eyes. Deeper in the tunnel, the ants were regrouping themselves. Some of their pipework had been lost during the surge, but they had components ready to replace it. It was difficult for Zaluth to see all the way back to the entrance. There was so much activity in the corrupted space that picking out individual details was almost impossible. It appeared as though the ants had already put in place a ramp, or moving platform system to ferry things down from above. In fact, it was possible they had already taken steps to widen the entrance. Taking advantage of the space afforded by the ants' momentary withdrawal, Zaluth crept closer, keen to see just what was happening in the heart of the invasion. It wouldn't be long until the blue had spread so far he'd never see it again until the monsters had been utterly defeated, so he had to seize this chance. Using all his guile, he slipped closer, though it was difficult given how barren and lifeless the tunnel had become. Eventually he managed to find a crack running along the roof of the tunnel, and he squeezed himself into it, traveling as quickly as he could. Once he judged he was close enough, he extended a single stalk and twisted it around to look in the right direction. In an instant, the acid froze in his veins, then heated to a roaring sizzle as the rage ignited within him. They had expanded the entrance. There were now 2 moving platforms ferrying things down to the tunnel floor from above, and it would soon be 4 as a swarm of ants worked to chisel the opening wider, but that wasn't what outraged the Krath. There were humans coming down. Armed and armored, they moved in concert with the ants, rushing out into the tunnel and forming up battle lines. Robed figures with bizarre appendages poking from their heads took positions amongst the ranks of insect monsters, their hands raised or heads bowed low. There were Golgari there as well, and Bruinchi, and Karmado. As he watched, oblivious to the approaching wall of blue mana, Zaluth's mind churned. Just what was he witnessing? All of these factions, aligned in purpose. Of course, it all made sense now. The ants were not the leaders of this expedition, they were a creation, a tool, wielded by the sapient races from further up in the dungeon against the fifth. This wasn't some random monster invasion, this was a unified effort, an alliance of kingdoms, seeking to crush the fifth once and for all. Snapping back to himself, Zaluth retreated along the crack, then forced himself out and began to race away. He had to catch up with the rest of the tribe. The Slee alone would not be enough to take on such an opponent. The Krath would need to unify for the first time in centuries. As he fled, he turned one stalk behind him for a final glimpse at what they faced. The reinforcements were endless. Every time one of the platforms came down, it was loaded with people, ants, and supplies. Unloaded in seconds, it would vanish back up into the tunnel, then reappear again seconds later with another full load. Before he escaped into one of the narrow offshoot tunnels, he'd already lost sight of the entrance. The ants, no, the invaders, had already blocked his view with walls. It would take days, perhaps weeks to bring the tribes together. Just how established would the invasion become in that much time? Chapter 1296, Nest Construction. Move, move, move. Isaac roared, though he felt as if he needn't have bothered. The targets of what his mother had lovingly called motivational yelling were a squad full of human couriers, carrying supplies for the ant builders. Even before he'd opened his mouth, they were hauling backside just as quickly as they could, almost running with heavy burdens slung over their shoulders. Well, he was here to make sure the supplies moved according to schedule, and by the plops of the pious, that was exactly what he was going to do. Rest when you're dead. Drop off that gear and get back to the lifts. Go, go. Again, he needn't have bothered. The men and women carefully dropped their burdens in the predetermined positions and then turned and sprinted back to the entrance, ready to collect the next load. Each and every one of them had a look of such focused determination on their face that Isaac was slightly taken aback. How many times had he seen such single-minded focus in anyone? Not many. Even scarier was that he could easily understand what motivated them. Somehow, that tricky little general, Solent, had forged such an incredible sense of purpose in everyone taking part in this invasion without ever saying a word. She didn't have to. The extensive drills, the manic attention to detail, the exhausting standards of perfection, all spoke of just how serious, just how consequential this mission was, better than any motivational speech could hope to. With the next load of materials came another squad of couriers, already loaded up, and they too began to sprint the moment their platform touched the ground. Deciding he didn't need to worry about ensuring those ferrying supplies needed motivating in the short term at least, Isaac turned his attention to his fellow ant riders. Brindle, make sure you aren't obstructing the path. Keep your damn eyes peeled. Remember where we are, we could be knee-deep in the plops in a second down here. Aye, Captain, the normally reticent ant rider snapped back. He and his partner repositioned themselves slightly, ensuring they didn't block access for the couriers and actively watching the walls and ceiling all around them. More supplies were rushed in, and soon a steady stream of smallish ants began to arrive, easily identifiable by their odd front legs and claws. These were the carvers, ready to begin the great work. Among them was a seldom-sighted, though expected face, Tungstant, one of the leaders of the cast. She rushed forward along with the rest of her kind, each carrying pre-built components, ready to be slotted in with the rest for the mighty construction they were about to undertake. Ready to build? Isaac asked, attempting to inject some levity into the moment with a broad smile and a stroke of his fine mustache. No, Tungstant snapped back, her antennae practically vibrating with tension. Trying to construct a completely sealed nest in an active war zone while surrounded by hostile, absurdly hazardous mana is completely impossible. Holding his smile in place, Isaac absorbed the blast of pheromones as Cavalanche shifted beneath him. I told you to keep your mouth shut around the carvers, her posture shift told him. Already the carvers were getting to work, a torrent of mana being summoned and driven into the tunnel rock around them. Holes were drilled, gleaming, enchanted beams were installed and then sealed in, plates with complex enchantment arrays were locked into place in a grid pattern, and then, finally, they got to work tunneling down. As space opened up, the blue mana sank down into it, thickening and growing more dense as it went, the enchantments lighting up as they made contact with cleansing energy. You seem awfully keen to get to work on a task you consider impossible, Isaac observed, not willing to learn his lesson. We're the carvers of the colony, Tungstant snapped back, her eyes focused in every direction at once, supervising the work of all the members of her build team. We do the impossible on a regular basis. Now be quiet and let me focus, this is difficult work. Finally deciding to take that advice, Isaac and Cavalanche took a few steps back and Isaac returned his attention to the tunnel. Here in the heart of the blue, they weren't expected to see much trouble, but that didn't mean it wouldn't come anyway. In the distance, he could see Anthony taking a rest, purging himself of the corruption that had no doubt built up within his body after his last foray out into the gunk. For several minutes, the Carver team, and others just like it, worked furiously, preparing for the next stage of the invasion construction. Human and ant teams worked without pause, ferrying pre-made construction materials to the site in an endless stream as, little piece by little piece, the grand edifice began to take shape. Breakthrough in 2, Tungstant announced suddenly, and her cry was echoed down the line of building teams. 2 here as well, 3 minutes, slackers, 2, here, 1 minute. And, of course, just in time, wave after wave of troops arrived, along with accompanying packs of woofers, along with more build teams carrying everything they needed to establish more purification plates. Get ready, you lot. Isaac called, using his voice this time. We are going down in the second wave. Remember the plan. With grim expressions, the ant cavalry gathered themselves behind the ranks of frontline troops. Breach, Tungstant roared. Breach, from the next team over. Breach. A moment later from the rest. Slowly at first, then in a flood, the blue mana rushed down the tunnels and burst into whatever lay below. The league teams gave it a moment to push back the toxic atmosphere, then plunged into the tunnels themselves. Isaac watched as thousands of ants raced down into the darkness, and could only shake his head. How could he possibly have imagined himself being in this position? Yet here he was all the same. We are right in the plops now, he muttered. When he thought of just how deep the plan called for him to go today, he had to brace to stop himself from shuddering. Gradually, the ranks in front cleared as the troops advanced below, and far too soon, it was his turn to advance. All right, lads and lasses, he bellowed, into the deep we go. With a roar, both vocal and pheromonal, the ant cavalry charged into the depths. Chapter 1298, New Leadership. There isn't time, we need to abandon the slime ground. Are you a traitor to the tribe? We fight. Zaluth could hear the heated argument even before he arrived. He'd pushed himself to the limit to race back through the twisted and narrow gaps between the tunnels, and even so, he'd barely returned ahead of the flood of deadly blue mana that had begun to fall deeper into the stratum. He burst into the opening, only a few hundred meters from the hidden entrance to the tribe's home, to find a large gathering of Krath, almost the entire Slee tribe, furiously arguing the next course of action. Surprisingly, the Kraflath was still alive, swelled up to her largest size as she attempted to intimidate the others into submission. As he approached, he could smell the fear, rage and desperation in the air. It was a heady mix, and dangerous as well. This many of his people together, with this heightened atmosphere, could lead to the destruction of the tribe as they frenzied and destroyed each other until only a few remained. Although it was perilous, this was also a moment of opportunity. Boldly, he pushed himself into the middle of the gathering, a thick trail of slime left in his wake. "The ants are coming," he announced loudly, causing eyes atop their stalks to turn towards him. "They've begun tunneling directly down towards us, spreading the blue mana down as they go. It won't be long until they reach this place." "That's impossible. There's no way they could know where the slime grounds are hidden," someone protested from nearby. "They don't," he replied confidently, "but it won't matter. They are simply digging down over a wide area. Unless they stop before they reach us, they'll be here in a matter of hours. You appear now. Where were you with this intelligence when our tribe fought the invaders directly?" The Kraflath spat, acid bubbling from the surface of her flesh. "Our beasts were destroyed, our warriors poisoned, while this coward huddled in the crevices." It was an attempt to turn the ire of the tribe away from herself and onto another target, but it was weak. She'd reminded them of the failed attack herself. Zaluth drew himself up even taller, not retreating from her larger form in the slightest. "I was scouting, alone, as my Kraflath had ordered. I'm surprised you have even shown your face here after the disaster you've caused. The Slee tribe has never been weaker than we are now, without our pets, with only immature and undeveloped bloodbeasts, and now forced to flee our slime grounds and face the wilds alone. You have brought the tribe to the brink of destruction." The stench of rage and fear only intensified with his words, escalating the tension to the brink of disaster. The Kraflath sensed it too, spreading her many, stick-thin clawed arms wide as she opened her maw to reveal her needle-pointed fangs. Several nearby Krath moved back from her, wary of her fury, but many others did not, which Zaluth noted with glee. The fear of her was failing. The rest of the tribe knew exactly who was to blame for this latest failing. "My only mistake was in trusting the information my scouts had provided," she hissed, slithering towards him, her eyes bulging red and full of menace. "Had we known the ants were capable of spreading their poison as they did, we would have succeeded in driving them back." Again, she tried to deflect the blame. Someone would have to pay for the failure that had occurred today, and every slug in attendance knew it. With one eye, Zaluth sought out Gozi in the crowd, who caught his look and nodded slightly. He was ready. Acid burned like fire through Zaluth's body as he prepared himself. This was the moment. If he was successful here, he would become the leader of the Slee, but if he failed, he would be consumed instead. If Gozi was legitimate in his offer of support, he had a good chance. "This is why you are a failure, not only as Kraflath, but as a Krath," he roared, and the crowd hissed at his declaration. The Kraflath surged forward, maw wide, but the tribe was there, throwing themselves on her and pulling her back. They wouldn't allow her to simply devour the challenger to maintain her rule. It was the most devious and cunning Krath who led, not the strongest. Why would you risk so much, an all-out attack, draining the strength of the Slee, when you knew so little? The ants moved quickly, and you panicked. Overconfident and uncautious, the opposite of a true Kraflath. "We are the masters of this domain," she roared. "Would you have us sit to the side and allow them to invade? Take what is rightfully ours. You have proven yourself to be a coward over and over again. You call me a coward, when I have spent more time at the edge of the invasion than any other member of the tribe. How close were you? When the mana surged forward and our warriors were poisoned, where were you standing, Kraflath?" He didn't wait for her to reply, instead turning his attention to the surrounding Slee. "It's a good thing I remained at my post, because I have learned the true extent of what we face. With a more wise and cunning leader, we could face the onslaught with our full strength, but instead we are diminished due to the rash, idiotic commands of this fool." "What do you mean?" Gozi demanded, sliding forward out of the crowd. "What do we face?" The Kraflath remained pinned to the ground, thrashing and growling, unable to control her rage. Zaluth felt a surge of triumph as he delivered the terrible truth. Once the ants had fought off the tribe, their true masters began to descend into the fifth, he spoke boldly. Human soldiers and mages moved among them without fear. The atmosphere amongst the gathered Krath instantly changed. A monstrous incursion had changed to an invasion by the humans. Was the Child Emperor behind this? That was much more serious. But that's not all, Zaluth continued, snatching their focus back to himself in an instant. "I saw Golgari amongst them as well. The Empire of Stone as well. The Krath hissed, fearful. And Carmado, and Folk, and the Bruinchi. He declared finally. There was silence as the Slee processed what they had heard. Had the entire world united against them? Would this be a war for the very survival of the fifth? Eyes, red with incandescent rage, turned toward the Kraftlath, still held down by fellow members of her tribe. In the face of such raw anger, even she was able to seize control of herself. Finally, Zaluth saw it, the fear in her eyes. I will lead us into the wilderness, Zaluth declared. Only the gathered might of the tribes will be able to stand against this enemy. Gather what you can from the slime grounds, but we have only a short time before we leave. Some of the Slee had already turned to race back into the hidden home of the tribe, whereas others waited, knowing what would come next. Now let us dispose of this fool, Zaluth declared, teeth flashing in an evil grin. Chapter 1299, Acid Lake. I just can't believe how terrible it is down here. Well, I can believe it, but just when I think the fifth can't get any worse, it somehow manages to find a new low. We haven't even managed to dig that deep into the stratum, maybe a kilometer, and already things are going to plops, as Isaac would say. What is that, Brendan? What do you mean, eldest? I mean, what are we looking at? Isn't it obvious what we're looking at? Indulge me, it's a lake of acid. Why is there a lake full of acid? Because there is. I feel like you're asking the wrong aunt, eldest. We can get Brilliant to try and explain the origins of this lake. I don't think that will be necessary, I'm just getting depressed. In front of me, directly below our position at the ceiling, the offensive body of Knot. Water bubbles away menacingly, oblivious to my mounting disapproval. Tiny turns to me and raises an eyebrow. No, Tiny, you can't punch it. He looks sad. I'd kind of hoped that raising his intelligence would lead him to consider other solutions, ones that didn't involve his fists, but alas, all that seems to have happened is that he can now think of more things to hit. Rather than watch the steady barrage of ghost fists flying from Tiny to the acid below, I turn toward Solent, who has finally descended to lead from closer to the front. Did we know this was here? I ask. She shakes her head. We weren't able to sense this far into the stratum, but such obstacles weren't unanticipated. You thought we might run into an entire lake of acid. I tried to anticipate many different eventualities, the small ant demurs. After digging down through a few levels of the fifth, encountering several of the massive, kilometer-plus wide tunnels we'd found so far, we eventually broke through to this mess. It's a massive lake filled with a thick, goopy mess of bubbling, acidic snot. I hate it. To make matters worse, there's clearly a heap of monsters inside it. We can see them wriggling and writhing down there, the surface of the lake shifting unnaturally as they shuffle about below. A few have tried to break the surface, perhaps sensing the cleansed mana above their heads, and from what I saw, they looked like nothing so much as mucus crabs, I guess I would say, even if I hate that phrase. It's not even possible to guess how deep it is, since the acidic goop is so thick you can't see more than a millimeter into it. So how are we going to get through this mess? I ask with a sigh. As quickly and as safely as we can, Solent replies. I notice that she won't give details unless I actually press her for them. Care to explain? It's almost like she's irritated at having to tell me the plan. She's asking for a thwacking, I tell you. Ultimately, this invasion is a war of mana against mana, she says, launching into a rather more expansive explanation than I was asking for. The natural mana of the fifth is completely toxic to us, making it the strongest weapon the fifth has against us. Conversely, the opposite is true. The mana produced by the woofers is anathema to the natives of the fifth, and is our strongest weapon against it. We don't need to go down and fight the monsters beneath us. Oh, thank Gandalf. If someone was going down there, I know who it was going to be. All we need to do is convert the lake into purified mana. The cleansed energy will do the work for us. Solent, you know perfectly well what my next question is going to be. Why the heck do you insist on making me ask it? I don't know what you mean. Like heck. Fine, how are you going to convert it? If we try and pipe that stuff up, it's going to eat into the material and break everything. If we actually feed it to the woofers, it might melt through them as well. Solent sighs. Thwack, you are pushing your luck, little general. That wasn't necessary, she says, rubbing at her head with one antenna and glaring up at me. I disagree. Fine, you are correct, it would be risky to try and pipe something this caustic directly to the woofers. So we will use a different approach. Which is, she hastily continues as my antennae twitch again. Which is to say, we will use some enchantment arrays designed by the mages to condense and thicken the mana the woofers produce before sending it down. It will be a war of attrition between the competing energies, but we can bring more firepower to the area if needed, while the lake can't. Huh, it sounds interesting. I suppose this is the stuff you were talking about. Just so. A large gathering of mages and carvers descend the vertical tunnel above the landing area which had been carved out of the rock. Even the stone is faintly toxic in this accursed place, eating into the ants' mandibles and forcing them to seek healing after digging for too long. Even the sanctity of Ant Zen has been tainted in this place. As I ruminate on just how much I don't like this place, the rest of my family has gotten busy. Over the next 10 minutes, an astonishing amount of construction takes place, clearing an area and getting what appear to be very sophisticated arrays set up. When completed, they look like a series of stone rings, each engraved and set with powering cores, stacked on top of each other with a couple of inches of space between. A dozen of them are put together in short order, while the carvers get to work creating a woofer platform. It doesn't take long for the wibbly-wobbly little things to be in place, the pipework necessary to feed them installed and the process to begin. I watch, fascinated, as the woofers begin to do their thing, but the blue energy is fed directly into the condensers. They aren't very large, but once this newly made blue mana touches them, the constructs pull the energy inside, acting like a storage tank. The individual rings begin to pulse and sync with each other. I can sense the mana inside thickening, growing more potent with every pulse. When the appropriate density is reached, the mages activate a secondary set of mana pipes, directing the energy down through the opening in the floor and into the acid lake below. Immediately, a furious hiss resounds as the first of the blue mana comes into contact with the lake, the two energies clashing, each trying to consume the other. As all the condensers reach maximum capacity, more mana begins to flow through the channels laid into the ground, and the fierce noises from below intensify. Peeking over the edge, I can see the surface of the acid lake has begun to boil and churn. This might take a while, I observe. Solent doesn't seem concerned. We have 7 more arrays we can deploy. We will get through eventually. Chapter 1300. The eggs that were left behind. Things are happening all over the place. More and more ants pour down into the 5th through the entrance. Even now, hours into the invasion, the flow of troops has not slowed. In fact, it has only accelerated. I can sense them all through the vestibule, feel their iron-hard resolve and selfless determination. Then I sense someone who has a little too much selfless determination. Is that Leroy? What in the name of heck is she doing down here? I haven't exactly gone out of my way to learn all the details of the plan, because my brains would probably explode if I tried, but I find it hard to believe bringing her and the immortals down here is a good idea. I'm sure Solent has a plan, but I can't think what it could be for the life of me. Perhaps Leroy bribed her to allow them to find eternal rest in the 5th. I wouldn't put it past the moronic ant to give it a try. There's so much activity going on, it's dazzling. If I let my mind dip into the stream of will for even a second, I feel like I'll get swept away in the torrent. There's fighting everywhere. As the colony extends our zone of control deeper into the 5th, the number of fronts grows larger and larger. Native monsters are throwing themselves at my sisters in mindless rage all over the place. More and more woofer stations are being established, the carvers and mages working at a furious pace to establish the network of channels and pipes that are necessary to maintain our position, and indeed, to expand it, because we aren't done yet. In fact, there's a heck of a long way to go before we hit the mark that Solent is demanding, and things are going to get even more crazy before we get there. We finally broke through the acid lake, which was a heck of a sight. When we were done with the thick, sludgy acid, it changed into something else entirely. I've got no real clue what it was, but it didn't burn or poison us, so, winning. The issue is what we found beneath the lake. There's definitely a series of caverns down there, Tungsten stated, prodding at the floor beneath us. The carvers were able to create a dry spot by raising up walls and pumping any liquid out, which is where we now stand, preparing to continue digging down. Naturally formed? Solent asked, intent. Let's go with half and half, Tungsten replied, continuing to waggle her antennae back and forth as she sensed the stone. Some of it has definitely been dug out, but by what method, I have no idea. The shape of the rock is strange. Perhaps it was melted away with acid. Tungsten clacked her mandibles thoughtfully, concentrating on what her more esoteric senses told her. That's possible, she said slowly. It would explain how smooth the walls are. Solent nodded, satisfied. We found them, she said, looking entirely too smug. Found who? I ask, glaring. This is likely to be a hiding place for the Krath. A village, of some sort. I expect it will have been abandoned by now, but this is an exciting find nonetheless. My antennae slump. I have to go in there, don't I? Yes, of course. There are almost definitely traps and incredibly harmful substances. None of us could hope to survive, but you at least have a chance. Quote. Yay, I'm surprised they were able to be found this close to the fourth, but once the carvers create an opening and I'm lowered down, it's clear to see that some sort of intelligent creature was living here. Wild monsters don't create such neat and organized living spaces. Back in the burning atmosphere of the fifth, I keep a steady flow of regeneration fluid running through my body. The count of ants providing will to the vestibule is rising every minute. There must be over 100,000 in the fifth by now, and many, many more waiting in the fourth. Trying to ignore the incessant irritation of having my carapace constantly melting, I do my best to take a look around. It's eerie being here. I can see little holes in the wall that appear to lead into sphere-ish slug houses, stacked on top of each other and burned into the walls of the cavern. Much like ants, they don't appear to stress about gravity all that much. There are paths and homes right up the walls and onto the ceiling. I try peeking inside one of the rooms, but I can't see much. It's so dark inside and the miasma is so thick in this place it's ridiculous. I mean, holy moly, how do they even breathe in here? The atmosphere is melting my eyes so fast the healing can barely keep up. Without a constant supply of regeneration fluid, I'd be blind as a bat in about a minute. Just as Solent had suspected, the place looks abandoned. I can't sense much of anything moving, no shifting gravity waves, no intent, nothing. The place is almost suspiciously dead. Which, of course, it is. When I move further in, I find what used to be their fields and cattle pits. Whatever they were raising and tending here, they made sure we wouldn't be able to get our mandibles on it. There are signs of violence everywhere, but the bodies are gone, absorbed back into the dungeon before I got here. There does appear to have been some effort at cultivating the land, though, which I find odd. Why the heck would they be growing food down here? Aren't they monsters? Don't think that I'm looking at nice, furrowed rows of rich, brown earth for a second. That's not how things work in the fifth. They were growing mold, but not in a cool way like the termites were, but in a gross, stinking, slimy way. Yuck. The blue mana has already begun to descend into the cavern, slipping through the opening I entered through and cleansing everything it touches. Good luck with those pits, blue mana, you're gonna need it. I try to stay ahead of the mana as I explore. If I find something interesting, I'll need to preserve it since it'll probably turn into mush the second it comes into contact with the purified energy. Despite keeping that in mind, when something finally catches my eye, it's only a split second before the mana hits it. A momentary parting of the haze, perhaps a lucky glint of light catches my attention and I lock onto them. They look like pearls, I would guess. Kind of inky black, shiny pearls, each about the size of a hatchling's eye and covered in a thin film of slime. There are only a dozen or so, nestled into a pool of clear fluid that clearly would have contained many, many more. The moment I see them, I realize what they are: eggs. The next moment, the blue mana envelops them, and they begin to sizzle.